Hello everyone, this is Colin once again. We're continuing on with the analysis of the Gospel of Matthew, and we are now in the second chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. And Matthew quotes a passage from Micah chapter 5 verse 2. Now, I've dealt with this in my other video, Proving Jesus is the Jewish Messiah. I believe it's part 1 or part 2, where this particular verse is dealt with. Again, I'm going to go back to the context, because this is where we find an interesting view of what Micah, the prophet Micah, was really talking about, as opposed to Matthew taking things out of context. Now, this passage is found in Matthew chapter 2, verse 6. And this is in reference at this point to the Magi trying to, following the star and to find Bethlehem. So Bethlehem becomes an important feature in Matthew's gospel. Prior, King Herod is mentioned, and again, this is talking about Bethlehem, where the Christ would be born, and things like this. And it says, quote, when he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Christ was to be born. And then, in Bethlehem in Judea, they replied, for this is what the prophet has written, quote, but you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people Israel. And then Herod, again, this goes on, and we'll get to the rest of it later. But what's important to note is this prophecy, because this is where the question is concerned. I mean, we have the historical account of Herod dealing with this concept of Bethlehem, which there really is no errors with that can be discussed, but this prophecy can be discussed in this video. Now, out of context, Matthew can use this however he chooses, but if you go back to the book of Micah, and you start with the beginning of chapter 5, you don't even have to go to essentially 5 verse 4 or verse 2. You can start at essentially the very beginning, which says, and I believe this is actually the end of chapter 4. So 4 verse 14, and I'm reading from the Jerusalem Bible here. It has commentary at the bottom, which I'll get to in a second. But if you read verse 14 of chapter 4, it says, now look to your fortifications, fortress. They have laid siege against us. With a rod they strike on the cheek the judge of Israel. And then following, chapter 5 says, but you, Bethlehem, Ephrathah, the least of the clans of Judah, out of you will be born for me the one who is to rule over Israel. His origins go back to distant past, to the days of old. Yahweh is therefore going to abandon them to the time when she who is to give birth gives birth. Then the remnant of his brothers will come back to the sons of Israel. He will stand and feed his flock with the power of Yahweh and the majesty of the name of his God. They will live secure, for from then on he will extend his power to the ends of the land. He himself will be peace. He will deliver us from Assyria should it invade our country, should it set foot inside our frontiers. Now I want to bring something up here. Someone left a comment on my Proving Jesus is the Jewish Messiah and said that this prophecy has never been related to the Assyrians. That's essentially what this viewer said on his comment, that this passage must be Jesus Christ. It cannot do with any sort of contemporary king who Micah could be talking about. But if you look at the context, let's just pretend for a second that this does have to do with Jesus. We notice some interesting phrases which seem to not have anything to do with Jesus. For example, it says in verse 3, Yahweh is therefore going to abandon them till the time when she who is to give birth, who is this? There's no mention of who this person is, gives birth. Then the remnant of his brothers will come back to the sons of Israel. So here we have this passage that says that the remnant of this child, who this random woman is going to give birth to, will come back to Israel. Then, referring to this child who is to be born, he will stand and feed his flock with the power of Yahweh, with the majesty of the name of his God. They will live secure, for from then on he will extend his power to the ends of the land. He himself will be peace. Well, we know in Jesus' lifetime he never accomplished this. Of course, there were many people who assumed that he would. He never actually accomplished this. Now, some Christians could say this is referring to his second coming. but this makes no mention of a second coming. Micah here is prophesying the moment this person is born, he will grow up and do these things. Then it says, he, meaning this child who's going to grow up, he will deliver us from Assyria should it invade our country, should it set foot from inside our frontiers. When did Jesus ever deal with the Assyrians? And again, I mentioned this in my other videos, so I'm confused why the person who put that comment told me that in the context that you cannot come to this conclusion. Why is that when it says that he, meaning this person, will deliver us from Assyria? Jesus never dealt with the Assyrians. So how in the context does this have to do with this said individual? Now I want to point something that's interesting here. The commentary on the Jerusalem Bible. The Jerusalem Bible is very famous. It hails back to the almost the oldest manuscripts we have of Hebrew and Greek for the Old and the New Testament. Famous people like J.R.R. Tolkien had to deal with its translation, and it's a very, very famous translation of the Bible. Now, it does say here in the commentary that with reference to the maiden who is to give birth to the son, it says probably the maiden of Isaiah's prophecy about 30 years earlier, Isaiah 7:14. Now what's interesting to say that is that, again, if, like I said in my previous video, that as we established, or at least the possibility was established, that Isaiah chapter 7 and 8 is dealing with the Assyrians. So how interesting that the commentators of the Jerusalem Bible would say this could be the child mentioned in 7:14, which was prophesied 30 years prior, and that again the enemy here that's mentioned again in Micah chapter 5 is Assyria. So the conclusion is, in the context of this commentary, and more importantly, of this chapter, because this is biblical commentary, this is an opinion of biblical scholars, that this has to do with Isaiah 7:14, but more importantly, chapter 5 of Micah says, he will deliver us from the Assyrians if they should invade. And that it does say that, that the time will come when she who is to give birth gives birth. Then the remnant of his brothers will come back to the sons of Israel. What does this have to... where's the parallel in Jesus' life that this has to do with him? That chapter 5 of Micah verses 1 through 6 is dealing with Jesus. So I look forward to people's comments. I would like to see what people have to think of this. So once again, thank you for watching. Peace be with you all.